can you start by talking to us about big data?
Wow, that's
because I want us to understand a little bit more.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So big data in general, or big data in the night, or you?
No, well, I'm building up to the night. I want to start baby steps.
Do feel free to stay on topic if you like, Sally, because Penny's list is like big data's the starting question.
Well, I imagine everybody in the audience has heard of big data. Is everybody familiar with that expression? Yeah. Right. So it's just our digitalisation has meant that we can capture vast amounts of data in a very easy manner, and the question is, what do we do with all this data, and how can that inform us, and how can that make for better societies? And behind all that, of course, is the analysis of big data, which is where I come in.
But also the computers that...
Yeah, the computers actually need mathematical algorithms that are programmed into them. The computers don't yet develop mathematics by themselves. No. So that's where I come in. I do both the mathematical development of the algorithms and then the coding of the algorithms.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could you describe for me, because I imagine that your relationship with computers might be similar to the relationship of, say, a film editor with computers, which is you might put something in and then click a button and it would just go rendering like that. Do you do all your work during the day and then the computers continue your work at night? Is that
they used to, but the computers go so quickly now so when I first started out, we would program a computer and I'd leave it, I'd go home and I'd rush in the next morning and see what the output, whether the algorithm had converged. Whether you could actually... So, and now, of course, with big data sets, there's a lot of... The computers, although they're faster, we've got bigger data, so it can still take a long time. But I do spend a lot of my time on the computer, and actually, if I want to just bring it back to topic, if I may.
Yes.
One of the things I was thinking of as, when I read the brief about, this is the Nocturne, so what does the evening mean to me? And as I was pondering this question, it was quite sad, I was just sitting at my desk working out some mathematics, and I thought, so what do I do when night falls? What sort of thing possesses me? And I realised that my first impression was I just turn on my desk lamp so I can just keep working some more.
Right.
Yeah, and I thought, well, that's really quite sad, that this is what it means. And then, of course, I thought about it a lot more deeply and tried... and I thought, the thing that I love about the evening is that, well, it's not the day. And so that means in the daytime, it's very easy to believe that we're the centre of the universe in the daytime. There is nothing else than this large sun, and it's shining down on us, and we see our own world, we go about doing our own things. It's so easy to think that the sun revolves around us when you're in daylight. And then the night comes, and all these things, this magic appears in the sky, and then you realise your smallness in the universe. You realise there are many universes, many stars out there, and it's just a really liberating feeling. And I imagine that's what a lot of scientists of old thought. I mean, it was looking up at the stars that motivated Galileo and Copernicus and Kepler. And it's this escape. The night is this escape into other worlds, and it's both frightening because you realise your smallness in the universe, and yet sort of so exhilarating because you feel that there's so many possibilities. And so I
pick up on that word you said, frightening, because I think I remember when I was young and would lie in bed, and just before sleep or when I was dreaming, one of my fears was this idea not of nothingness but of unendingness, so which you're touching on with space, so it's kind of infinity.
Yeah.
And I've always wanted to corner a mathematician and ask them about infinity, and I feel like this might be my chance.
No. Well, you're not alone. Actually, it's quite interesting. My daughter, she's 16 now, but when we first moved to Melbourne, we're from Sydney, she told me that her most frightening word in the world was space. And in fact, we were getting around to get somebody to come and help out with helping me out around the house and doing stuff while I was travelling. And I said to Daisy, that's my daughter, I said, well, you can ask her a question. And Daisy thought about it a long time, and she sat down and she said, how do you feel when people say the word space? And I'm sure it just floored this young woman as to... Well, she responded in that she talked about the moon, and Daisy said, well, she's not so bad. So and it was a nice relationship with a very long time.
Can I just ask, you talk about being excited by that opening up and that limitless possibility. Yeah. But what motivated you to get into maths and to stats in the first place? I mean, surely that's about finding a solution and closing something down.
Yeah, I mean, they're good questions. I suppose, you sort of summarised my life. It seemed like a good idea at the time. So, I started out, I was obviously okay at maths, and I went on, I did engineering, and I then worked for an oil company in London, and I really missed university. So I went back to university and did an MBA, and then thought I definitely did not want to have anything to do with the corporate world. So then I went back and I sort of fell into maths, and I met my husband, who's also an academic. He's a psychologist, but we don't hold that against him. And then actually, but actually, what I've come to believe, I've heard a lot tonight about the creativity of the arts, but actually, I find mathematics very creative. I mean, there is nothing more abstract than this concept of infinity. And we deal with it all the time. I mean, it's something that rolls easily off our tongues. We talk about infinite dimensional space.
Is it a number?
No. And there are different sorts too. So it's not a maths lecture, so I don't want to go on too long. But absolutely, I find in mathematics there's that same effect as the evening, which it's when you look up into the stars and you realise the expanse of the universe, and then you've got this tool, this mathematics. It's just a human construct. It doesn't exist outside our brains, and yet it explains so much of what we see. And it's so engrossing that I feel very blessed. I get paid to do what I do for free. Yeah. So I think I'm lucky.
Could you talk? You talked to me before about, you said you were turning noise into signal, and I loved that.
Okay.
Yes. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So basically, there are mathematical algorithms around. So if we pick up a signal, say, for example, a lot of the big data stuff that I'm working with, I'll give an example, which is with people with epilepsy, they have these very severe epileptics, chips implanted in their brain which measure their voltage. And these chips, we're getting data from them at 200 observations per second, per channel, per person, all the time. So it's a huge amount of information, and our goal is to try and predict when they're going to have a seizure, because then they can pull the car over to the side of the road, they can excuse themselves. So a lot of people with very severe epilepsy that's not controlled by drugs, they just end up being quite depressed because they withdraw from life. And so that's an example, I suppose, of we're using mathematics to try and... The voltage reading in the brain is a very noisy signal, and we want to be able to say there's something about that noisy signal that we can use to help this person in their life. And it turns out that in particular individuals there's a surge in power at a low frequency in the spectrum. And so that can be used. But, so that's what the signal and the noise is. So everything you will ever observe is always noisy. Sometimes the signal is obvious.
But the observing
I'm
is...
looking at you, and there's my signal. But if I was to take a satellite photograph of Melbourne, that would be a much more noisy signal. So there are algorithms around that develop those sorts of signals.
Wow. Do you watch sort of with bated breath the amount of data that we can store and process? Do you sort of think in 20 years when I can store 100 mega what's in my fingernail or whatever, you already know what questions you're going to ask in 20 years? Have you got ideas that are bigger than the processing power now?
I think lots of people have ideas that are bigger than the processing power now. But I think also it would be foolish of me to say that I can even predict what's going to happen in the next 20 years. I would not have predicted the last 10 years, and I don't know that anybody would have predicted how much smartphones, just have changed the way we live, and I think it's...
Or Prince Philip's knighthood. Wouldn't you predict it?
Predicted that.
That was...
Maths isn't going to give you that.
No, unfortunately not. And Tony Abbott was rubbish at maths. I was, so there we go.
Can I ask, when you can't sleep... Sorry, Penny.
That's all right.
When you can't sleep, what do you do?
Do I count sheep? No, no, I don't count sheep. So
Your
I do
mind,
get
though,
up.
seems to me to be racing. If you're
Yes,
seeing
I
signals
know,
all the
yeah,
time,
yeah,
thinking
yeah,
about
yeah.
things.
Well, but actually, I find that mathematics is so soothing. It's like meditation. It's when you've got the worry beads, and it's got this rigor about it, and it's very, very soothing. In fact, I'm very lucky. I've got my son Jack in the audience there somewhere, and he, I know, finds the same soothingness of the mathematics.
Do you ever just think purely in numbers?
As you get more on in maths, there's no numbers. There's just all sort of
Ends.
That sounds like my kind of maths.
yeah, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. It's not about addition. I actually had to give a talk recently to a bunch of accountants, and boy, I think, after I finished talking about spectral densities, it was probably not what they'd signed up for. But there's not a lot of numbers in spectral densities. Yeah.
I guess that calmness, though, that's what interests me
Yeah.
about the openness versus the closedness. My very limited understanding of maths is always the search for a solution rather than an opening up, and I'm just...
I think the way maths is taught in schools, there's always a solution. But the work I do is that we're developing theorems. We're sort of trying to we're creating new knowledge or new maths theorems, and we hope sometimes they get used, sometimes they don't, sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't. But it is very much a creative exercise of creating a piece of new something, whatever that something is, rather than solving a problem. Although both are solving problems is very important. So,
I've got two more questions. I don't know how much
sorry.
time we have left. What have
I'll
we got?
stop interrupting. Go
No,
ahead.
no, it's good. Oh, okay. I've got to choose one. You talked about at night and turning on your lamp so you could keep working, and it felt a little bit of a solitary image. Do you ever feel okay, here I am, I'm really excited about the spectral analysis of time series, and there's literally like one person in the world that you'd be able to talk to about it? Do you ever feel isolated? Or
No, I love that feeling of isolation. In fact, a perfect day is a day at home where I'm just with my family. If they go off to school or whatever, and I'm just working from home and doing what I do. I absolutely... I love it.
So you're a solitary person.
I don't
So
think
night
I'm
is your time, really, is it?
I don't know that I'm solitary, but I don't really need to talk about my work when I do my work. I'm quite engaged in it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I do have time. I don't know if it's a very silly question, but I really want to know. Could you describe to us spatially how you see numbers?
I think I see them pretty much the same as anybody else. To tell you the truth, I don't know that I see
Really?
numbers any differently.
So you see them in a straight line, just heading that way?
Well, I don't actually see any numbers right now.
Penny, that's in the category of the interviewer revealing more about themselves.
I'm not even getting into how I see.
So you see them in a straight line that occasionally beats you around the head?
So, how do you see numbers?
I go 1 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 100.
So
It's quite...
are you asking, do I have a linear concept?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, sometimes I do, yes, but a lot of the time people don't actually think linearly. We think more naturally. We think more in the log space, funnily enough.
Right.
Yeah. We're more multiplicative than additive. We talk about percentage increases rather than absolute increases. And so when you start to talk about those sorts of things, it makes sense to talk about logarithms rather than in the normal number space. Yeah.
Okay, I think...
Sorry. Just imagine you've got two fingers
I
or
love
something
it.
rather than... Yep.
I love it.
That is fantastic. Do you... just one last question from me then, if I can interrupt. Is kind of it's a pretty simple thing, but you have kids yourself. You're trying to. You said your son's calmed by maths also. Do you talk numbers together at home? Is that a?
We've tried.
They're just not up to it. They disappoint you.
It ends in disaster.
And
I imagine
does your
the
husband,
same
the
as-
psychologist, step in there?
Yeah, that's right. Breaks up the fight. No, imagine like anybody else, it's wonderful when you see your own children developing. You so much want to go in and engage them in it. And of course, they're just busy trying to be their own person and wanting to have absolutely nothing to do with you. My daughter won't even walk behind me. When I had tried to tell her everyone's got a mother, but she, that doesn't wash. So
I'm frankly just relieved that my 4-year-old's not scared of ceiling fans anymore. That's my only hope for him. Maths be damned. But thank you, Penny Modra. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Sally. That was great. I didn't